This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for the Intentionality Gurus with Candace Pollock. And Candace, as we were talking offline, I want our listeners to know that as I'm preparing for this session tonight on positivity and whatever else you are going to guide us through in the next 6 weeks, I have been looking at things where I thought I had gained strength and was, finding those inner clues inside of me. And yet when I redid some of the questionnaires, it was like, wow, I haven't learned a thing. I still have a lot of bad habits. So I'm hoping today when we talk about how intentional are your capable standards, maybe that will explain to me why I'm feeling the way I am.
Well, and it's interesting you should start with that, because I was having the same dialogue in my head that, when I chose the name, the Intentionality Gurus, one, I don't consider myself a guru by any stretch. And I often notice, but I don't always act on things. I don't always walk the talk, I'm just a human. But I'm on the path. And so that's what's important. And just to stay on the path and to be open to exploring those little forks in the roads where we might look at things from a different perspective. So we're just delving into that.
Okay. Makes me feel better.
For now. And then
Right.
and it'll hit us again in the face. And
Right.
we'll just go through a cycle again. But that's just being a human.
So how intentional are we? I mean, what are our capable standards? Do we all have the same ones?
Probably not. And they may be changing in an individual depending on the goal at hand. So this is still couched in the overall topic of accountability, or uncommon accountability, by the authors of the Unaccountability book, and Moran and Lennington. And the reason I like this book, and the reason I like to do a deeper dive into books, is because there's still a lot of lessons to be learned. And so when we think about accountability, I mean, you tell me where I'm wrong, but we often initially think of it in terms of either being held accountable by somebody else. Somebody else is telling us what the standards are,
right?
Or we're telling someone else.
Yep.
All right. And then you either measure up or you don't. And if you don't, there might be consequences. That's the traditional idea about accountability. And there's nothing wrong with that. It'll always exist. But the authors are pointing out, they also wrote the 12-week year, which is a great mechanism for gaining control over your calendar and your objectives, and merging the two. And so their idea is that we can look at accountability from a different perspective, which is more in the terms of ownership.
Okay.
All right. So then they say that ownership is personal accountability is rooted in the ability of a person to make productive choices that lead to higher performance, facilitate growth, and increase fulfillment.
Makes sense.
So so in previous podcasts, we talked about the ownership concept, but what stood out for me when I was going back over some of the material, because I do, study these things, not just for myself, but for others, obviously. The capable part is their terminology. So if we think of accountability in terms of capable, I became acutely aware of all the ways that I blame external circumstances for me not being able to meet a deadline, or, what have you, or deviating from something I said was important to me. So that got me into the whole idea behind the Intentionality Gurus, is to explore all those hidden iceberg kinds of things that drive our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So in this case, I realized, oh, okay, I can be thinking of this in terms of, we can set our own standards. We don't have to wait for somebody else to set them. We're setting them for ourselves. And because those standards are so tightly correlated with the high performance, the level of performance, whether it's high or not, and personal growth and fulfillment, that would be a really cool thing to do. So does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, we can, and I've done this myself. I've set up standards for myself to meet. And then I feel like I'm failing because some of those standards are intertwined with maybe abilities that I don't have at the moment. Not that I can't, you know, fine tune things, but, you know, like for instance, when I first started creating websites, I only use templates because I am not a coder. And I remember, about 2-3 years ago, I had a client who came to me and said, you know, well, you're going to do this through coding, right? And right away, I felt like a failure because I had set standards in my head, how I could do this, how I could get clients. And I felt like I was fooling myself because to do it through coding, I would have had to probably go back to school to learn it. And it's like, by the time I do that, you know, she'll have found somebody else to do her website. So we have to be careful the standards that we assign to ourselves, and assume that, oh yeah, I can do it, when you don't have the skill set.
Well, and that opens the conversation to the idea of what do we have control over? Because, you know, often, at least internally, emotionally, we can take responsibility in a sense for outcomes that are not within our control. I mean, often when I'm coaching people, when they're talking about relationships, for instance, they'll say, well, you know, he or she needs to do this or that. And if they would just do this, then my life would be great.
Right.
Well, we know that that's a fallacy, because we only have control over our own actions and thoughts in some respects.
Right.
At a minimum, regarding our thoughts, we can train ourselves to question them so that we're not necessarily getting caught up in thought ruts that don't serve us anymore.
Okay.
But in this context, we can be paying attention, just noticing the fork in the road that, all right, here's this thing I said I wanted to do, and I'm either doing it with intention or I'm doing it unconsciously. And then when it doesn't go the way theoretically I wanted it to go, then that's when we can start beating ourselves up. Whereas if we set it intentionally, and I'm not saying being rigid, just noticing and then saying, okay, making those little micro choices at every point where you might lapse back into some other way.
Right.
Right. So the way that showed up for me is this morning, I couldn't find that darn link to get on the Zoom. And so, you know, doing a little post-mortem, I might have somehow gotten it on my calendar if I knew how to do that. This is, you know, I'm an idiot savant when it comes to technology, just to make it easier on myself, because I feel anxious when I'm late for things.
Right.
And so on. So I just wasn't as intentional as I might have been otherwise.
And like you've said, we all go through this. I think the worst part for me is that I tend to beat myself up, but beat myself up more than anybody else ever would.
Totally. I mean, we're our harshest critic, and it takes a toll on us because we're setting, you know, we're releasing those stress chemicals when we're having the thoughts that are beating ourselves up. And then if we habitually have those thoughts, the whole concept behind neuroplasticity, that the brain, when you have emotions coupled with a thought, it can hardwire some of the little neural pathways so that can become a thought that becomes a thought rut after a while. And
Right.
then that impacts our, you know, feelings about ourselves, all sorts of things. So anything that where you have felt capable in terms of your standards of accountability to yourself or to others?
You know, I would say, you know, as I said something to you before we went online, and that was in the last couple of days, I felt like I've been an imposter in things I was doing, because I now realize I wasn't doing those things with intention. I was doing them just because they were in front of me, and I just was like trying to check them off. And when I do that, I don't feel, I can look back and say, hey, either I didn't get it done the way I wanted to, or I just feel incomplete, I guess is where I'm going with that. But when I do things with intention and know that I'm doing them that way, even if they don't go perfectly, I can still feel comfortable in my accomplishments.
It's a perfect example because there's still a win in it when you do it with intention. And when we don't do it with intention and it doesn't go well, we beat ourselves up because the outcome wasn't what we wanted.
Exactly.
But we didn't control the circumstances, the things we can control. I don't want to, blur the line and say we need to control all of the elements like a traffic jam. You want to get there early, but some unexpected traffic jam occurs that you would not normally exist at that time of day or something.
Exactly. It's almost like something that I brought up, I believe, in the last podcast. I've been working with somebody who I knew I was allowing that person to beat me down, ask me to do things that I wasn't comfortable with, ask me to do things that even if I was comfortable with, I didn't want to be responsible for them. And I was having a hard time communicating that to myself, let alone to this other person. And prior to that podcast, I thought I had gotten my voice and communicated it. But I found out afterwards, this person was still hearing what they wanted to hear. And so I had to put it, first of all, black and white for myself. This is what I can do. This is what I might try to do. And these are the things that I just won't do. And once I did that and I started repeating it to myself, I then felt more confident to go back to that person and say, okay, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I might do. So you can't count on the might. And these are the things I'm not going to do. And you can count on the fact that I'm not going to do them. And it made me feel so much better because I created my boundaries. And every once in a while I get a, little nudge from that person, well, can you do this? And I just refer back to, that's a maybe, or, that was a definite and maybe I didn't do it or do it in the way that I had promised. So I'll correct that. But in the past, I would just feel miserable and be on demand for everything.
And I really love that because you did the intentional part ahead of time rather than getting caught up in a situation and then trying to lay the mental track about where the boundaries are and where they aren't.
Right.
And so that you, in a way, you protect yourself. Not that I'm saying you're defensive, but it's just planning ahead for what can go awry. And then the other part is you, like guardrails, you have those standards that you created in place. And then if the conversation goes off path, as you said, you can anchor to what you pre-decided.
Right.
The other part I really like about it is when we say no to something, it's like a telescoping. Remember those cups when I don't know if you go camping, but when I was a Girl Scout, we go on camping trips, we had those little collapsible cups.
Yep.
And then they open up. So when we say no, it's like the decision just stays there, like the collapsed cup.
Right.
All right. But when we say yes, then we're saying yes in the moment without necessarily intentionally thinking through all of the other yeses that are required, all the other commitments and actions, what have you, that are required to fulfill that yes. So here you collapsed it at least
right.
a couple of levels, and then it wasn't going to budge after that.
Exactly. And, for a person like myself who always, and when I did the assessment, it came out again, number one, you're a people pleaser. And it's like, I want to please people, but I want to please myself first. Um, but for years being that people pleaser, even though I may have set standards, I would change them because I was talking to you or working with you. And that really doesn't go well if you're constantly setting standards and then changing them because you want to please somebody.
Well, and your boundaries are constantly morphing, and most of the time not by you. You're living your life, you're existing in the context of other people's expectations about what you should do and what they need,
Right.
not necessarily what you can do. And it's hard. I mean, when you live that way, it's an early coping mechanism. When you live that way, it's like us, we breathe oxygen, and fish breathe oxygen, but in water. We don't do that. And so we don't know any different. They don't know they're in water.
Right.
Most of the time, we're not even aware about our oxygen in the atmosphere. So it's just paying attention. All right, what's acceptable here, and so on. So again, the idea behind this is just to pay attention, and then to own what you're going to be capable of. So in the context of this person, you're not going to be capable of doing the things that you said no to.
Right.
And you might have some capability standards around the things that you might do, although that might be a slippery slope. You may
Yep.
look at that. And then presumably you thought through the things that it was a definite yes.
Exactly. And I think the reason I divided it into 3 areas was I know not everything is a yes or a no answer.
Right.
And so for me, at least at this stage moving forward, I just felt, hey, I needed this little bucket because I know myself, I may want to do something extra, not necessarily to be that people pleaser, but to be my own pleaser. So if that makes sense, it's like, hey, there's this little thing here, and boy, if I do this, that's gonna make me feel really good. And then that's an extra for that person.
Yeah, so that really underscores the whole point, which is it's your decision, and you can scrutinize it later or not. But the idea is that you thought about it, and it's on your terms, and it's in response. I mean, we do want to please our customers and so on, but
Right.
It doesn't mean that you're at the mercy of the other person's expectations of what you should do.
Exactly.
Because we've all had those kinds of people in our lives. I mean, I can't imagine anybody hasn't had that kind of a person, except maybe the one that does all the demanding. But the
We all
idea,
know somebody like that.
we all do. And until we get clear about our boundaries and what's within our control and what we choose to have within our control, it's really hard to not be responsive. I was groomed as a kid to be kind and generous, and if somebody else had a need, it was up to me to respond.
Right.
Something's wrong here. I need to do something about it to make it better. And that's a hard thing, just as you were experiencing with pleasing, to say, well, it's not something I can do all the time for everybody.
Exactly. And I think we all have to get to that point at somewhere in our relationship with other people, because if we are always trying to please them, a lot, I would say in my case, most of the time I found out that not only was I really not pleasing them, but I was failing them and myself at the same time.
Exactly, because the standards weren't clear. So the authors in the book are talking, they mentioned studies and all sorts of other things, and it's called the uncommon accountability. They talk about high standards correlate with high performance and so on. And, low standards would correlate with low performance. And a lot of that's subjective in our own minds.
Right.
And it can show up at work, and it can show up in our personal lives. And so the idea is this a standard that's an obligation, or is it a standard that we've chosen? And then they've also shown that once we get in the habit of setting our standards, also they call, or the ownership, the capability, what are we going to hold ourselves capable around, that it'll be a self-reinforcing habit. So the more we do it and are gratified by it, that sense of fulfillment you described, the more we'll be moving in that direction. So we've taken that fork in the road, and the more likely we will find more fulfillment and performance and so on.
Makes a lot of sense. I've been
Well,
taking.
and I've noticed it with me that, I've always underestimated how long it would take me to get places in the car.
Yeah.
I just abhor being late, but often I would be cutting it close because, the time it takes to, get all the equipment I need in the car and then get on the road. The thing that I think about is just the highway part,
Right.
getting to work, and I forget, oh yeah, there's that slog through, some side streets and so on with red lights, and then on the other side of it, when I get off the highway. And so I endeavored to be more intentional around it and start out earlier, 15 minutes earlier. Well, that didn't always work. And the idea is the days that I've adequately calculated it, I feel much better. But the days that I arrive, even if I'm just 5 minutes early, I feel rushed. I don't, and it kind of colors the experience I have for a while. It has like a little emotional residue,
Right.
like the first half hour, 40 minutes. And I've noticed that I've gotten better just because I was paying attention to it and setting that as a specific intention.
It's interesting that you bring up, things that relate to time. Every night before my husband and I go to sleep, we confirm with each other, what appointments we might have, what time are they starting, so that we can at least coordinate ourselves. So like this morning, my husband doesn't have anything until this afternoon. So that meant that he probably could sleep in later than I. And typically when I know that, I usually take my clothes and stuff out of the bedroom at night, put them in the office so that when I get up, I don't have to, I'm not going to disturb them. And last night I didn't do that. And so this morning I had to go, tiptoe around the bedroom and stuff. And so when he just woke up before the podcast, I apologized to him and he goes, hey, it happens. But if I had been intentional about my thinking, he probably could have slept in an extra hour and probably been, have a bigger smile on his face for me. But it's those little things that can throw off your whole day and throw off your mannerisms with other people.
Well, and in aggregate, they can add up so that we're not feeling very good about ourselves. And then that can color some of our other behaviors. And that
Exactly.
can lead to, stress eating and all sorts of things. So if there was a particular category, just to play a game for you or for listeners, if I ask this question, how might you or anyone listening fill it in? So if I'm intentional about the standards I'm set about X, I would, and I don't, the X would be whatever topic you choose.
Well, if I'm intentional about the standards that I'm going to perform for this situation, I'm going to get through it with less anxiety. And I'll actually be my own guru at that moment in time. That doesn't mean I'm for everything, but for that specific task that I'm performing.
Exactly. And I like the way that you phrased that, your own guru, because that's the whole point. We all can become our own gurus. Nobody, I mean, we all have that inner wisdom, that gut sense about what's appropriate for us and what's not.
I relate this to on my weekend job. So every quarter there is a new training that comes out, and it's tied in with a pseudo contest. And we have one or two people in our territory that just run away with it. They can get everybody in their store signed up to do training, and they all do the training and whatever. And when I first started this job, you know, I hated the competition on it. And I felt like I can't do it. And because I was feeling like I couldn't do it, I wasn't doing very well. But in the last couple of years, I now go into it and I'm not comparing myself to that person who always gets to the top. It's like, that's their standard. That's what they do. And if I could get up there, that might be nice, but I'm going to focus on what I can do each day when I'm at work. And that has helped me tremendously, rather than looking at this goal that management has put in front of us. I take it in small bites. What can I accomplish today? And if I don't accomplish it when I'm working, at the end of the day, when I sit down to do my report, I'm not blaming the fact that, you know, half the employees didn't show up today, so they couldn't take the time to train. I don't blame it on the fact that we didn't have as many customers in the store that I could train. I go by the facts and I look at what I have done well during that time and not what I didn't do well, because most of those things are out of my control.
Yeah, so again, a perfect analysis of the what's within your control, and then setting standards for your own performance standards, and then that reinforces those feel good emotions,
Right.
and you will probably succeed going in that direction, taking that fork again and again and again.
Right. Absolutely.
So another question is, what I need to set my capable or accountability standards is?
I guess what I would say, at least for myself, would be the confidence that and believing in myself that I can do whatever is set in front of me. And when I say do whatever is set in front of me, it may not be to the same quality that you might set or my management team might expect, but it's what is it that I'm going to be confident with.
Yeah,
Because
and the fact that you're making a conscious choice around it will be a big factor or element in its success or not. Because when we're unconsciously driving, for instance, we may get lost, we may lose track of time, et cetera, et cetera. So it's the same thing with these kinds of decisions. How intentional am I going to be around it?
And I don't know about you, but for me, and I don't want to say that I'm not setting my standards high enough, but if I don't inflate what my standards should be, but take it one step at a time, I find that I'm really growing with it. It's like, oh, okay, that was easy. I could do that. Oh, because I could do that. Okay, I'm going to do the next thing, and then you grow by it. And this came up again yesterday. My store that I was training at, I had trained everybody who was on the floor. So I had nobody to train. And yet my husband works at another location and he was swamped. And so with intention, I called our manager and I said, would it make more sense for me to go to his store and help? And my manager said, absolutely. Get in your car. If you're willing to do it, you go there. And I'll tell you, the two of us, when we left his store, felt the best we have about this position in probably 6 months. And
And why do you think that is?
because we both saw a way that, hey, he's not going to be overwhelmed. I'm not going to feel useless, because that's how I was feeling at my location. And then we talked as I was driving over about how we were going to approach this. And when I got there, we did just that. He knew what his role was going to be, because it's his location. I knew what my role was going to be. And we just kept moving forward. And then every once in a while, we would come together and work together. But for the most part, it was like, you're going to do your thing, I'm going to do mine. At the end of the day, we're going to have results. And our results turned out to be almost 3 times what we had expected. And that's because it was so easy for the two of us to follow a path.
Well, and Karen, this is just so perfect, because a lot of the book that our conversation today is based on talks about accountability in the context of the workplace. It's not just that, because it's all personal ownership.
Right.
But they talk about how external standards are applied, but we can still take personal responsibility, ownership for our particular performance. So I think you just gave a perfect example of how that would play out. The store has expectations about performance and sales and who knows what. I mean, what those things
Right.
are. And then you and your husband created a different internal standard that was consistent with the job standard.
Right.
And then the two of you left feeling not just that you met the obligation of their standards, but you felt fulfilled.
Absolutely.
And you had high performance.
Yep. And we were both so exhausted that we both came home and took a little over an hour nap. So, hey, we rewarded ourselves.
Exactly. It's perfect. It's perfect. So congratulations on that. Kudos.
Well, thank you. And see, at the beginning, before we went online, I was saying to you that, I felt like, I wasn't, everything that I'd been doing and learning had gone away. And yet when you start to talk about it, you realize that you are using your new skills, and how rewarding that can be.
Yeah, and just paying attention to that, and not jumping to conclusions about ourselves, and that none of the black and white thinking, oh, I was late, therefore, I'm worthless.
Yep. Well, another podcast, and hopefully our listeners are gaining some knowledge from all this. And we welcome you to go to the website, which is www.theintentionalitygurus.com, and follow us on YouTube, and check us out. And if you want more information, Candace's address and information is on the website. So we'll see you again in 2 weeks.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.